Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcast, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is season 3, episode 2, and a couple of very exciting things. Number one, we are launching our year-long Witcher Readalong. We're here to talk about The Last Wish. Yay, by Andrzej Sapkowski. So we're going to dive into that. But also, very exciting announcement. Thanks to all of you. We are now officially monetized on YouTube. Yay! So thank you so much to all of you. We've made like $1.66 so far, so it's very exciting, but like moving in the right direction, and appreciate all of your support on everything that we do, and yeah, like onwards and upwards. So we're here to talk about The Witcher. Yay.
Can't believe you did make a toss your coin joke while you were talking about money.
You're fired.
Yeah. You're totally fired.
It's your job. Please do tell everyone about our Patreon, Leanna.
I mean, you were just talking about monetization. That is also coin related.
Absolutely right. It was a missed opportunity.
It truly was. So if that's any indication of how this podcast is going to go, guys, don't watch this. It's terrible. We don't know what we're doing. Missing every opportunity
for all of the jokes. But if you do want to toss a coin to your podcasters, you can also do that. Hi, we've got some people here. Hello. Glad Matt is saying let the Witcher journey begin. We are very excited, and this will go up. The audio will go up once we have finished doing the live stream. But hello, welcome. So this was a reread for me, but the rest of the series won't be.
They're all rereads for me, except for Season of Storms. The only one I haven't read is Season of Storms.
Excellent.
Which I've heard pretty negative things about. So I can't say I'm super excited about it.
All right, we're going to do it. Should we do a recap of the reading schedule for the year for anybody who missed it?
Sure.
All right. So in case anybody missed this, and I do have a comment pinned on our Discord channel now if you're joining us over there, but we are doing The Last Wish, obviously, in January. And then in February, we're reading Sword of Destiny. We're taking a break in March. And then we're reading Blood of Elves to Lady of the Lake from April to August, taking a break in September, and then coming back in October to finish up with Season of Storms. So if you're joining in, that is the plan.
Correct. Well done.
Yeah. Thank you. Urza has read everything but Season of Storms as well, so that'll be new to all of us.
I think because Season of Storms did come out so much like later than the rest of the series that I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, also that now. But it's like for a lot of people, they've already read the series, so that like when that came out, it's like, no, I was officially done with Witcher. Don't what is this now?
Right. That's fair. So how did you do with the reread? Is this your first time rereading this?
Yes, first time rereading it.
Okay. Did you have similar feelings?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's always like slightly different, especially if your first read of something is pretty blind. Maybe not so if your first read of something is like something that you were like very, like you had a lot of information going in the first time. In the first time, like all I knew was that the video games were based on these books and that people had said they were grimdark. I think actually, I don't think anyone had told me that the short story collections were largely fairy tale retellings. I think I didn't know that. So when I picked up The Last Wish the first time, I was like, wait, is this Beauty and the Beast?
Yeah.
What? And so like this time, obviously, it wasn't that experience of like, oh, what? What are we doing? It was like, oh yeah, I forgot how many fairy tales got retold in this. So it's slightly different an experience, but yeah, I remembered I recall this book being fun, engaging, violent, interesting, thought-provoking, funny, and it was all of those things the second time as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it was interesting for me too because I similarly read this going in knowing very little, and then rereading it, I've now seen the television show. I have a lot more context, and I love that you're looking at the TV show. But I will say, I think I had a better time rereading it. I enjoyed it the first time around. The fairy tale twists were fun, but I think I picked up on a lot more of the nuance and detail this time just because I think I understood a little bit more about who these characters actually are and what the world actually
Well,
is.
maybe I should say that. It was I didn't even think about it. And well, I'm thinking about it now. That this time it was a different experience because similar to it's been 5 minutes, First Law, where when you go back and you reread it and like because he has a habit of like taking characters that were like just there for a scene or just there for this one like bit and then coming back later and being like, why don't I just give that character a whole plot line in a later book? And so then like if you've read the whole series, then when you go back to the beginning, some character that is appearing in a scene that the first time you read it, you're like, some guy.
Mhm,
Now like some guy is somebody that you spent quite a lot of time with in later books. So now you're like suddenly a lot more like paying attention to some guy because they became someone more important later. So like in having read the entire Witcher series now, going back now and reading The Last Wish, there he does throw out a lot. And
mhm.
this is like I don't know if all editions, this one's, I guess this one doesn't. So that answers the question. Not all editions say introducing the Witcher, but like that's what The Last Wish is kind of intended to do. That's why people say
Mhm.
to read it first, because it's like, here's the world, here's Geralt, here's what a Witcher is and does, here's how the elixirs function, here's the kind of beasties that are in this world. It's like a big sampler of what you're gonna get in like the world of The Witcher. And
Right.
so it not only throws out a lot about that, but like there are a ton of names that like I know the first time I read The Last Wish, I was like, who? Like, I
Mhm.
don't know any of these people. And so then now that I've read the entire Witcher series, there's a lot of names for the people that Geralt is interacting with in the stories, or also there's a framing device throughout this whole book where like we keep circling back to like the quote unquote present day for at least this book, where he's
Right.
like where he is presently for this book. So then like the people he's talking to then. So like the names, they're not like nothing to me anymore. Now I'm like, I know that name. I did not know that name when I read this the first time.
Yes. Yeah. No, and I had a lot more kind of visuals in my head too. One thing that I will say about this that really stuck out to me that I know because I know we have previously done an episode talking about the Witcher show. And one thing criticism that I know you had had and other people had had is that Geralt in the show doesn't have a lot of personality,
He really
and
doesn't.
he really doesn't. And I think reading The Last Wish, I was like, yeah, that is a really fair criticism. Like he
Well,
has
not
so much
only does
more.
Geralt not have a personality in the show, he and Jaskier,
Mhm.
Dandelion, don't have
Dandel
a relationship in the show.
or
He's
Dandelion, as they
Yeah.
say on this audiobook.
So like it they could change the relationship and depict it differently, I guess. I guess you can do that. But it's a pretty interesting and multifaceted and multi-layered relationship that those characters have in the books. And it's just like made both of them so shallow and so boring in the show, where
Yeah,
like Yaskier is just comic relief, like literally just like slapstick walks on to be a goof. And like, I mean, toss a coin slaps. That is like amazing. But that's not
100%.
enough to like make up for the fact that you completely ruined the relationship between Geralt and Dandelion,
Yes.
Jaskier, Buttercup.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I feel like that central friendship is such a great part of this book, and also Geralt is funny and has a sense of humor, and you just really don't get that in the show. So I think those things definitely stuck out to me upon a reread. Um, I see lots of things
I
happening
see I've
in
ruined a
the
lot of people's
comments.
bets on when I was gonna mention
Oh, when
First
you were gonna
Law.
mention, First Law, somebody had it at over 10 minutes. Y'all know, never takes long before we get a First Law mention.
You're probably better off doing it as bingo instead of bets.
That is true. Or a drinking game maybe, although
Only
depending
if
on how
you
much
wanna
you wanna
die.
drink. Yeah. Exactly, exactly. Uh, yeah. We have somebody saying Witcher 3 is the best of the games, books, TV show. Maybe at some point this year, we should have an adventure and try playing Witcher 3,
I
Leanna.
have tried playing Witcher 3. I'm not good at playing video games because I don't play them, so it didn't go terribly well, but I have played it.
I know we have it. My husband's played all the video games and read the books. Like, he doesn't usually read a lot, but he read all these, and, so I could. We have it. I haven't tried it.
I mean, if there was ever a video game that I was gonna play, probably it would be Witcher.
Probably would be Witcher, yeah,
Well,
and
that's a lie because I actually really like playing Disco Elysium, but
yeah. Um, what okay. Where do we wanna go with this?
well, how are we doing spoilers like immediately or
Let's do non-spoilers first, and then we'll get into and then we'll get into spoiler territory.
okay. Well, I mean, I've read the whole series except Season of Storms,
Okay.
but for you who has not, I don't know, when you read The Last Wish both times, did you feel like this was a good introduction? Because that's how it's pitched. It's like this is what you got to read first to like get your
Mhm.
taster, to get your sampler. Like, do you feel? I mean, it's kind of hard to say, I guess, until you start reading the series. You're like, oh, I did need that, but like having just read that, do you feel like, oh, I feel well versed and introduced? I'm ready now to like start the series, or no?
I mean, I think so. Again, it's hard to know for sure without reading the other books, like what my opinion would be on a reading order. But I definitely think The Last Wish is accessible without having read anything else, especially because it is mostly fairy tale retellings. Like you kind of have some, if you know, if you're familiar with that, you have some knowledge going in. And I do think it does a pretty good job of introducing you to Geralt, to certain things about the world and what he does and
What a
some of the
Witcher is.
characters, what a Witcher is. So yeah, like I wouldn't say that I fully grasped everything. I think rereading it after seeing the show, I get a lot more out of it than on
Do
a
you
first
think
read.
the
But
framing device is helpful or unhelpful?
it's fine. I don't, you know, I think if it I don't know, it's one of those things where I'm like, I think that's a fine way to do a short story collection is a framing device. I like it as a narrative choice. I don't know that the specifics of the framing device used in here did a ton.
So
S
for me, because I was
you
gonna
know?
say, like, I felt like the first time I read it, the framing device was just like kind of confusing to me because I was like, I don't know what this is, what this
Right.
means. And I kept thinking it might be maybe by the end of The Last Wish, I'd be like, oh, I get now why we had this framing device, but that never happens in The Last Wish.
No.
And like now, because I've read the entire series, this is kind of what I was saying before. I was like, well, I've read the series, so I know these character names and I know what we're talking about. And the conversations that he's having where he's referencing other things in the framing device, like I actually understand the framing device now. And I'm like, well, I know who you're talking about, what you're talking about. Like, but if you don't, it's kind of weird because like this is the introduction, right? This is what you're supposed to read to
Right.
like get to know Geralt. But like I don't feel like you're gonna make any sense of the framing device until you already know a lot about the Witcher series.
I mean, I think that's fair, but also speaking of first law, it's another one too where there's plenty of things that you don't pick up on until you do a reread after having read more in it. So I'm okay
But with
if
first
this
law,
is like that.
it doesn't feel bewildering in first law. You're just like, I don't know where this is going. But you don't feel like I don't know what this is at all. Whereas like the framing device in Last Wish, I felt very disoriented by it the first time I read it. I
That's
was like,
interesting.
where are you? Why do we care that you're there? What's happening right now? What are you talking about? What is happening right? Am I gonna figure this out at some point? And you're like, nope, guess not.
I see, like, whereas I guess I didn't have that experience, it wasn't bewildering to me. I was just kind of like, okay, this is how we're organizing this collection of stories. Cool. Like, I don't know. I just kind of, I wasn't bothered by it, but yeah, I don't know. We have a comment. I didn't know these were fairy tale retellings, but I loved that part of it. I really did too. And the first time I read it, it took me by surprise because I didn't know that that was what we were getting. And I think it's fun. I like how it kind of takes a new tack.
But for an introduction to The Witcher, I didn't know that it would have fairy tale retellings the first time I picked it up, and I was like, oh, it was a pleasant surprise. But then it
Mhm.
was an unpleasant surprise to find out that that is not what The Witcher series is at all. So
Mm,
like it's as an intro, I was like, well, if this is the introduction to The Witcher, I'm assuming that means that that's what we're doing in The Witcher series, and it's. I mean, only insofar as like there are very familiar archetypes and tropes that he likes to like subvert. and introduce, you know, characters that are like very familiar to you from folklore, from fairy tale, but not like actual fairy tale stories. It's just like, you know, a vampire shows up and like he's going to subvert your expectations about what that means in a story if a vampire shows up. But it's not like, oh, we're going to retell Snow White at any point. Like it doesn't really do that in the Witcher series.
Which I guess is good to know. Again, I haven't read the rest of them yet, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, and so that's why as an introduction, I'm like, it could set you up for disappointment then if you're like,
That's fair.
now what you're expecting.
Right.
And you're like, no, we were just introducing Geralt and decided it would be kind of fun to do it via fairy tales. But like fairy tales have nothing to do with the Witcher series.
Yeah. I mean, I think that could also be a concern. Priscilla says the framing device is the part I didn't like. Okay, so somebody else is with you. I wasn't confused, but I wasn't invested in the framing story. It felt like it was just interrupting the stories.
Well, I guess when I say confused, I don't mean, like, I was confused as to like why this was here, or like, I was like, is it going to make sense to me what he's talking about at any point? And it didn't, and it doesn't. I mean, it does now because I've read the Witcher series, but the first time I was like, I don't get why we're doing this.
Right.
Yeah. But for anyone who's thinking about picking up The Last Wish, are there like pros and cons that you would like, warnings and encouragements that you'd want to give people?
Oh, I mean, I think honestly, I don't think watching the show first is a terrible idea. Because I do think it gives you a lot more context for who some of the main players are and the world. And even though the book is different in some ways, I think depending on the kind of reader you are, I think having some of the visualization and like the deeper knowledge of some of these characters in the periphery could be helpful. At least for me, I feel like it helped me get more out of it on a second read.
There's a lot of noise in the street outside.
Oh.
I was like thinking about how to answer, and then there was also noise. But I mean, I guess, but at the same time, I feel like because they do change so much in the show, that if you're already going to be kind of overwhelmed by everything that's thrown at you in the Witcher series, and then if you are also further confused by the fact that you've been given a mistaken first impression of what is going on by the show, and you have to unlearn that and relearn what is actually going on with an equal amount of threads and plots and characters, like that might be more work.
Maybe. I guess it depends on the kind of reader you are. I liked having the show as a reference point, but I mean, I don't know.
I mean, in particular, they like mess so much with the timeline of things with Geralt and Ciri and Geralt and Ciri is the like bedrock on which the Witcher series is based. And because they mess with that so much, I feel like it would be quite confusing if you're going with like the show first and then you go into the book expecting that.
Maybe. I guess part of it too is that I knew that the show wasn't a 1-for-1, so I guess like I don't expect adaptations to be exactly the same as books.
See, you read Last Wish, then saw the show, then read Last Wish again. But if you had just seen the show first, then that would just be like your intro to stuff, as opposed to being like, well, I know this is different.
I don't know. A lot of people are saying they played the video game first, which is interesting. Cats Read Books said, since I played Witcher 3 first, it wasn't confusing because I think most of the stories read like or are quests in the game. Someone else also said that they did that first. And someone saying same with playing the games first. So I don't know. It's kind of a toss-up, it seems like.
Well, and this is where
Priscilla. Oh, this is interesting. Priscilla said, I'm caught up on the show and agree, having watched it adds some interesting elements to reading the books. Then again, I'm not usually bothered by an adaptation and a book being totally different. So I don't know. And a lot of people are this is a fair point, Urza, that the video game is the way most people got introduced to the books in the first place.
Well, it's also, I think it's more helpful than to play the video game and not watch the show as your introduction, because I mean, speaking as an expert on the video game, which I am clearly, but because the story of the video games is not the story of the books. And so because of that, then the video games serve to introduce you to where we are, to who we are, to the rules of this world, without messing you up on like what the story is going to be, because the show is going to mess you up on what the story is going to be.
I mean, mess you up is such a intense way of putting it.
Don't think you understand how intensely convoluted the story of The Witcher is going to get, so just buckle up.
It'll be it's gonna be interesting. 'Cause I mean, that's the thing is, like, yes, I had read The Last Wish before seeing the show, but I haven't read anything else, so we'll see. But I'm not expecting it to be exactly the same. I think the comparison is interesting too.
And mainly, you're gonna pick up The Last Wish to be like, "Oh, Geralt has, like, a personality.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Who
I mean,
knew?"
who knew? No, he really does. He's hilarious. I was, like,
And
laughing.
extremely layered and three-dimensional.
Yes. That as well.
He's just, like, a lump with a sword in the show. Oh, it's so upsetting.
But an attractive one.
But, there is a lot of discussion about the grimdarkness, about the sexuality and sexual content and the
Mhm.
objectifying of women and things like that, so, I don't know,
Yeah.
thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have mixed feelings about it. It's There were definitely moments that I was kinda like, okay." But then there are other things where I kinda feel like, well, there's some degree of equal opportunity for people being sexual and being sexualized. This is not the worst thing I've read. There were definitely some moments that I was like, "Oh, good. Yeah." Casually mentioning that a 15-year-old is, like, in a relationship with an older man, good. But, I mean, like, but it's
I guess to me, I was does this entire book series have a very male gaze? Yes, it does. But do I think it's sexist? I don't. And to me, there is a difference because, like,
yeah.
in like having a more like sexualized gaze at the woman's body is like present, but to be a truly sexist book would mean to me that you utterly devalue the female characters and do not allow them to
Right.
be characters in their own right and make their own decisions and be sexually liberated equal to the men. And they are.
Mhm.
And so like our author and our main character views women as like sexually desirable and describes that. And so it's very male gazy. But
Mhm.
the women aren't just objects in the story. They aren't just plot
Yeah.
devices for the male character. They have their own arcs. And even as the series goes on, there are so many female characters with so many agendas and they're very intelligent and they are
Mhm.
again very sexually liberated. And later on in the series, we have conversations about menstruation, which are things that male authors never want to touch. So it's like stuff like that where I'm like, male gaze, yes, sexist, no, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with that based on the limited exposure that I have where yeah, I would agree with you. Male gazy, yes. Are there moments where I'm like, "Okay, do we need the no." But I appreciate the fact that the female characters feel pretty fully fleshed out for the most part. They're not just existing to be sexual objects or like for the purposes of the plot of the main male character, which is where I really start to have problems with guys writing in fantasy sometimes. So, um yeah, like, I think your mileage may vary. It's one of those things where I'm like, if you're very sensitive to that, it might not be for you, but I
Well, and like
don't
I
think
said, to
it's
me, I draw a distinction between a male gaze and a sexist writing, but I'm
Mhm.
sure for a lot of people, they wouldn't draw that line and just say if it has a male gaze, it's sexist. Which, like,
Right.
I'm not going to say you're wrong. That's just not how I view it, and that's not my experience of reading something. I have, there's like I don't know, there's multiple checkpoints and layers to get through. You're like, I have a male gaze,
Yeah.
noted. And if through this male gaze we continue to then treat people like objects that we view with a male gaze, okay, now we're in sexist territory. But for me,
Yeah.
it has to like go through several like sort of steps like that. And for some people, which is valid, like if you don't want to read something that views women fairly sexually on a regular basis because that you don't like it, you object to it, you find it uncomfortable, you think that that's wrong, whatever, like that's valid. But for me, there is a distinction to be made between like that gaze and the ultimate handling of characters as a whole.
Right. No, I would definitely agree with that. I don't think this does the I also probably have a little more grace for things in fantasy if I'm otherwise happy with some of what it's doing, whereas in a more contemporary work, if I have less patience for things like, for instance, not doing a good job of handling sexual violence towards women, things like that. Like, this doesn't do a great job with it, but it's, like, so I can see why there would be criticisms of it, and I could see why there might be people who wouldn't wanna read it for those reasons, but it's, like, right on that line for me where I'm like, I'm okay."
Well, and as you say, it's certainly not the worst I've read before. So, like, if
No.
somebody objects to it, like, that's valid. But I
Right.
hope that person also objects to the many, many other fantasy series that are equal to or worse than this in
Yeah,
that respect.
agreed. Okay, maybe let's take a quick look at the comments on this because I think this could be interesting. Priscilla said, oh, I think this was about the earlier conversation. Hold on. Urza loves that he holds to his principles even when under pressure. Most of the main women in the series are more powerful than Geralt. Yes, which I think is interesting. Yeah, I have heard this, some negative things about Cavill and
Cats reads books
gossip.
that I don't know. I've seen some very negative things about Cavill lately. There's reasons he isn't keeping jobs, methinks. So
I
I actually am behind on my gossip. Last I heard was everyone championing Cavill for leaving The Witcher because like he left it because they're doing the character dirty and yay for our hero Henry Cavill. And I just rolled my eyes at that because I was like, one, I don't know that that's true at all. That's wild speculation. And two, he was doing the character dirty with his crappy portrayal of the character. So get out of
yeah.
here. So if there's
So the
actually bad news about Henry Cavill, like
oh,
not
you
that I wish
haven't
him ill, but like I'm kind of pleased.
so you haven't heard this. Okay, I have heard
No.
this. Okay, well, let me inform you. Allegedly, allegedly Henry Cavill is kind of sexist and has kind of gone down the like, you know, Reddit
I am
pipeline
Jack's
of
complete lack of surprise.
and allegedly was a miserable person to work on set with for women, and that was part of why they didn't want him there
Oh,
anymore.
kill surprise. I have
So
said this a million times, and I will say it until Hollywood listens to me. Carl Urban should play Geralt of Rivia. He would be
okay.
perfect.
Okay. Jessica, this wasn't good kind of bad. There was no weird nipple obsession, so it's winning. Good kind does have some of that sometimes. Priscilla, that's a really interesting point. Male gaze versus sexism. I agree. I do think I think that's it's a good differentiation.
So spoilers.
Spoilers.
Do you have a favorite story? And was it the same the second time as it was the first time?
Oh God. I don't know. Was I thinking about this while reading? I mean, I think one thing that I enjoyed both times that I just thought was kind of clever is I like the take on Beauty and the Beast. I think it's just an interesting subversion. I like the subversion of these fairy tales we think we know. I think and that was one that stuck out to me.
I
How
think
about you?
the Beauty and the Beast one stuck out to me the first time simply because that was the one that made me go, aha, these
Yeah.
are fairy tale retellings.
Yeah.
But I like that story fine, but on reread, like it's not the most interesting story.
Mhm.
And I think the story, is the story actually called like the lesser evil or something, or the littler evil or something like that? Um, it's the one where everyone keeps trying to get him to choose the lesser evil.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's called The Lesser Evil.
The
Okay, well
Lesser
done.
Evil.
Well
Yeah,
done.
that one yes. That one is really interesting
Well,
as
I think
well.
that's the one that also is the most it is the most interesting to read in this book, but it's also the one that the most is an introduction to Geralt's moral compass as his own moral compass versus
Yeah.
what the rest of the world might think or what witchers in general might think. It's like when we're talking about this book as like this is a necessary introduction to the Witcher. Most of it is like here's how elixirs work and I fight beasties and here I get paid for it and like that's okay, well and good. But
Mhm.
that's the story where you're like this is an introduction not to witchers but to Geralt.
Right. Yeah, well, and I think that is something though that we see in other stories as well, including, the one with like the child surprise whole thing. Um I think
So that's the
that's
one that's probably the most important as an introduction to the story of the Witcher
right, which
series
I know because of the
because of
show.
the show.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that holds true there as well. And I always find it interesting the moments where people make assumptions about who he is because he kills beasties for money, and he's like, yeah, no, I have a code of ethics and I don't just do whatever people want me to do, even if you are royalty. I really like Geralt a lot.
But at the same time, he's not like I mean, I don't know what you mean when you say you like Geralt. I would say I
Mhm.
like reading about Geralt because like I don't necessarily always agree with Geralt. He's not a character that's like a hero that does the right thing and we love him
No.
and we stan. I just think he's a very interesting character with a lot of layers and I like following his story and I like seeing what he's going to do and how he reacts to things. So like it's, he's not like an awful character like a lot of people in First Law, but it's like similar to First Law where I'm like when I say I like these characters, I don't mean that I like these characters. I mean that I like reading about them.
I guess with Geralt, I'm like, I like reading about him, but also I think he would be entertaining to hang out with. Like, I'd be friends with him. I think he's funny.
Or I do think he's funny. And I like to hang out with him via a book, but in real life, I don't know.
I would hang out with him. I think it'd be interesting.
But yeah, that's what's also missing in the show is like the conversations between him and Dandelion aren't just like Dandelion being a goof and then Geralt
Yeah.
going, "Oh, shut up." Like they
Right.
actually have like long conversations that are very witty on both sides.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate. I think you do lose a lot of the personality in the show, and a lot of the humor and the friendship, and I love that in this. Yep. Um, let's see. Urza says, "Or did he leave for the reasons he said and the showrunners being embarrassed spread lies?" Maybe. I've heard it through the TikTok grapevine, which is why I say allegedly. Who knows,
I
to
bet the
be
truth
honest.
lies somewhere in between both extremes.
That seems that isn't that usually the
Like he may
case?
have been displeased with the direction of the show. They have been displeased with him in general, and everyone's displeased, and so they're parting ways.
Right. Who knows? Um, we also have another fan of The Lesser Evil. Jessica liked the one with the Jinn or genie the best. Yeah, that one was
The
that
eponymous Last Wish.
the eponymous last wish. Yes. No, I liked that one too. I also think it's interesting seeing his relationship with Yennefer, which
But
comes into
as
play in that one.
Urza says, meeting Yen is important, and that is important in that story. But
Mhm.
in that story, you also do see how much he cares about Dandelion. It's not, I mean,
True.
everyone's like, oh, that's the Yennefer story. And it is the Yennefer story. But it doesn't, like, it also further develops his relationship with Dandelion.
Yes, I agree with that. You get both.
And I hate
Um,
that too in the show that because they did the Last Wish in the show. And
mhm.
the way that once again, like he acts like it's just such a burden to have to deal with the pain in the ass that is Yaskir, that he's gotten himself into a pickle and oh, I guess I have to help him. Whereas here, like Geralt is very, very worried about Dandelion and he's like gonna
Mhm.
move heaven and earth to help Dandelion.
Yes.
Which is, we love a bromance, which is really what you have between
Yeah.
Dandelion and Geralt. They're
I
not like,
know.
yeah.
Also, what a missed opportunity to have an on-screen bromance. I mean, really.
Especially because the actor who plays Yaskier seems like a very pleasant chum to have a
He
bromance
does.
with.
It's true. It's true. And Jessica, I agree with you. I also really like Yen. I think she is a really interesting character. I yeah, I'm curious to see because I know there was a lot of discourse with the show about the issues with the disability representation, and you do get hints of that in the book here as well. So I would be really curious to see people's thoughts on that. But I also think that one thing that's interesting about it is she's still not pretty. Like in the book, she's like some of the disability stuff has been fixed, but she's still described as not being pretty.
But she's alluring.
Alluring, yeah.
It's kind of like I feel like more oftentimes we talk about men this way, where they're like, "Well,
Mhm.
he's not actually handsome, but God, he's sexy."
Yeah.
Like that's basically Yennefer's vibe. Like, well, I wouldn't say she's pretty, but God, she's sexy.
Mhm. Which I think people really can be. I
But
don't
I
know why
think
women always have to be pretty.
but so I think this is my very positive reading of this, but of course I'm not a person to be qualified to have an opinion about this, so people feel free to set me straight on this. But I
Sure.
think like cuz you just brought up the disability rep of the show. And I
Mhm.
kind of get why they gave screen time to something that isn't actually in the book. Like it's alluded to that this is possibly kind of what was probably her backstory, but it's not like a
Mhm.
thing in the book. It's just kind of like generally sorceresses have this kind of thing. This is generally where they come from, and that's probably where Yennefer came from. And
Right.
in the book, because it's not something that we spend a ton of time on, the way it comes across in the book is a subversion of this like constant thing in fairy tales and fantasy where like powerful sorceress type women are beautiful. And they
Mm.
just are. And that's just how they are. Because, like, oh, if you're a magic user who's powerful, you're a beautiful Galadriel type person. And the fact that in this world, that doesn't come for free, and that's a choice, and that comes with the profession, and that she had to work a ton to like fix herself to like look the part. And that
Mhm.
and not only did she like and not only is she not naturally this gorgeous sexy thing, that like, she went under the knife ye old fantasy way, but not only that, but it caused infertility. That like this
Right.
wasn't free. And that I think that that's the focus of it in the book, is the fact that like, oh, sorceresses aren't just magically beautiful. I mean, they are magically beautiful, but it's not that like, oh, if you're born as a magic user, then you're like a sexy man and a hot lady, and that's just how it be. Like, no, like the sorceresses
Mhm.
have at their disposal magical powers, and at great risk and cost, they make themselves appear the way you imagine a sorceress ought to look.
Mhm.
And like that's the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah,
Not this
which
like
I
it's kind of like torture porn and like
yeah.
kitty porn in the show.
Yeah. There is a bit of that. No, I agree. I think so far, at least from what I've seen, it's interesting, but I do think you still get the undertones of this thing of her like, Geralt is aware that she doesn't want other people to see what she was before, like, that she's self-conscious about that.
Which I think, I mean, in the modern day with how much like we talk about plastic surgery, like, and
Mhm.
how now it's people more openly talk about what work they've had done, and we in
Right.
general are more aware of it. But like people in the past were like, oh no, this is all natural. Like they would never want to like say that they actually had like a facelift or whatever it is. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's very like that's why these books feel so like topical and modern, despite being a fantasy book with like swords and beasties and whatnot. Like Geralt's moral code is often quite, I wouldn't say modern in the sense of like any modern day person would agree with him, but like it's
Mhm.
not what you expect from
Right.
an old timey fantasy book.
Yes.
And I
Um,
mean that too. So like before I mentioned in the main series, you get conversations about menstruation. The fact that Yennefer is infertile and wants to do something about that, and that's like a major part of her character. Like that to me is why these books, like maybe there are some sexist things, such as the
mhm.
male gazy treatment of like women's bodies at times, but like the fact that we're dealing with infertility as like a main plot point for a
Right.
main female character is like that to me like speaks to like considering women as human beings that have their own personal
Yeah.
problems and journeys, and like her this is her priority more than like fucking Geralt.
Well, and I think that's the thing is that I like that she doesn't just exist for the sake of Geralt or for, like there are the women in the story
But
don't exist.
it would also be pretty sexist if Yennefer was the only female character that was
Yes,
like a three-dimensional female character, and we'd be like,
that's
well,
true.
that's why Geralt loves her, but every other woman is just like, and that's
Right.
not true. There's a lot
That's
of
not yeah.
powerful female characters in the story overall.
Yeah. Yeah. Comment saying, I think one of the things I like most about Geralt is how surprisingly relatable he is. I didn't expect to feel so much sympathy for him. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Well, and I think these books do a good job of like I was just going on and on about what Yennefer has to do to become the beautiful sorceress that she is. But
Right.
we do get, some sense from the conversations that happened in The Last Wish about what Geralt went through to become a witcher. That also didn't happen by accident or come free.
Right. There was a lot of trauma that went into it. Urza says, I think it's the easiest way to get it across in visual media, just make them pretty instead of how having a normal woman play a character that has that magnetism. Yeah, I mean, of course, in media, that's what they're gonna do. The urge to bring in stuff from later books is real right now. We'll get there. We'll get there. Just wait. Give us some months. Jessica says, I think for how old this book is, the disability rep is pretty good. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I always appreciate your perspective on this, Jessica. I think it's useful to hear from somebody who's kind of in that space. But yeah, I mean, for the time the books came out, it's like, because these were coming out, when did the first one
The
release?
90s predominantly. And then it's mainly the 90s. And then like Season of Storms came out in like 2013,
Right.
I want to say.
Yeah.
The later Witcher books, I think, were coming out in the 2000s. Like we had moved out of the 90s by the end.
Yeah.
I think. I might be wrong.
But so, I mean, this was the same time as some of these other big series then, like, Sword of Truth and Wheel of Time and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not ancient.
No.
It's still in our lifetime, but yeah.
Yeah. But also I think, for the time it was coming out, I don't know. I feel like
I mean, even 10 years ago, things weren't as like well handled.
right.
The idea of even, I mean, I doubt Andrzej Sapkowski had beta readers or sensitivity readers in Poland in the 90s.
No. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Last Wish came out in 93 according to Goodreads, and that's probably the English translation, I'm guessing.
No, I think that's when it
Or
it
is
came
that
out
the
in
Polish? Okay, great. 93. Wow. Yep. What other things do you want to hit on with this?
I mean, I feel like there's so much and so little because it's like you can pick apart every single story and every single thing that they decide to do and what this means about Geralt's character, which would take 10 more hours.
Right.
But to talk about something briefly, I can think of nothing that is like a quick. Also, let's just briefly discuss.
Well, I'd imagine it's hard too because I haven't read farther in the series.
Like,
So
like
it's
what do you
like
think this means? I guess I could say that. What do you think
Yeah.
this means? I guess I would be interested to know. I don't actually know what you know about what the main Witcher series is about, and what do you think it's about?
I don't know. I mean, I know a little bit about some of the differences between what they've done in the show and what's in the book. So I know the whole thing with Ciri is part of it, but I don't really know.
All right then.
So we'll see. It's
Any
gonna be an
thoughts on
adventure.
what it's about?
Uh,
I mean, so for me, like when I think of a series, even if I know very little about it,
mhm.
I'll often like have an image in my mind of what I expect to like be the experience of reading it, and I'm often wrong, but like
Yeah.
nevertheless, like I'll have developed in my mind an impression of like when I'm in that series, this is what it will be like to be in it.
I think the thing is I've heard vaguely some reviews of the series where people say that it ends up feeling sometimes a lot like reading about European history. So I guess I know that. So I don't know that I have a lot of expectation. I hope to see more of these characters that I think are interesting. So Geralt, Yennefer, see their interactions. I mean, I just like those are the things that I'm enjoying. Other than that, I don't know that I don't have a ton of expectations going in. I'm trying not to.
That's fair.
Riding the countryside and slaying beasties and political stuff happening and magic. I don't know. I mean, that's like
I mean, the short story collections, this and Sword of Destiny, are fun because they are more
Mhm.
adventure of the week.
Yeah.
Which, like, honestly, I think the show would have been better off making each episode an adventure of the week instead of like trying to make it Game of Thrones. And it's like, it's already a convoluted timeline. Like, just make it adventure of the week. It's fine. There's a reason the book is structured that way. Like, because
Mhm.
it's much more digestible. What are you doing?
I don't know.
Yes. Urza says we'll meet Triss in the next book too. We will meet Triss, I believe, in the next book.
Exciting.
She's an important character as well.
Yes. No, I'm excited to finally get to them because they've been kind of on my eventually want to read list for quite some time. So
Yeah, no, they're meaty books. Like it's
Mhm.
honestly like having read the whole series, coming back to The Last Wish is like, oh, this is so nice. Because like by Tower of Swallows and Lady of the Lake, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It kind of, in my opinion, gets a little away from the author. So like it's just kind of a lot.
Yeah.
So Last Wish is like nice and tight and like straightforward, and here's the adventures and here's the moral qualms and some food for thought, and then we're done. And it's like, oh, that was so nice.
So you're saying future episodes will have a lot more to talk about.
It's either that or not, because like I just said, like we could pick apart every single story in this book and we
Mhm.
can do a podcast episode on each story in The Last Wish to like really like
Right.
dive deep. Or to do an overview, like I don't know, it was good. So like Towers Falls and Lady of the Lake, we're either gonna like have to talk a ton about it all, or we're just gonna be kind of like, well, that was a lot. I don't
Yeah.
know. Where do you want to start?
There are some interesting okay, I guess one story in this that I do wanna talk about because I think it's just so interesting because you get a reversal that, like okay, so the one about, um, the guy who's I don't I don't know what it was called, but the one about the guy who's, like, in love with a vampire lady, demon type thing, whatever it is.
Well, that's the Beauty and the Beast one.
Yeah. So, I guess one thing about it, right, is that, like, he's the beast, but she's a monster, but then also he kind of is because he became a monster because he sexually assaulted a nun. So it's like,
Yeah, nice happy story.
you know, I just think it's interesting because it's like I spend a lot of the story being like feeling bad for him, and then I'm like, hmm,
I
do
mean,
I,
basically
you know?
all of them have reversals. I mean,
Yeah.
where I thought you were going with that was the story about the king who wants someone to like not kill his beastie daughter, but save his beastie daughter. And everyone is like, well, that's impossible. But he's like, oh, someone's come and told him that it's possible to save her. And so now he's decided that he doesn't just want her slain, that you have to try and save her, which is why
Right.
no one
Her
is
his,
doing it.
her his incestuous daughter that he had with his sister.
Yes, but
Like,
that's the reversal though, is that like when he's asking Geralt, is like, tell me truly, was it that it was incest? Is that what made her this beast? And
mhm.
Geralt's like, no, but it's probably because you were committing incest that someone hated you enough to poison your daughter and curse her like this. So in a
Yep.
way, yes, incest caused this, but not in the way that you think or you
Yep.
meant.
Yep.
And so like I liked that because it I feel like that is kind of the grain of truth in fairy tales where it's like there isn't an actual curse and yet the story remains true because what the curse represents is hatred and acting out against somebody, and that did happen.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. Let's see. Jessica says, you need to take into consideration that back then disability was really scorned. We didn't get the ADA until 1990. Wow. Yeah. My mom had to almost sue the district to get them to accept you into public school. Wow. That's that's intense. I mean, good for your mom, honestly. Um I didn't realize it wasn't until 1990, the American Disability Act.
I have no
So,
idea
yeah, that's
what
a good point.
legislation is like in Poland. It might be that they're more ahead of the game.
Maybe. That would be interesting to know. I have no idea. Jessica saying, "So this rep was good for 93." Good to know, thank you. Everyone's favorite or least favorite s did you have a least favorite story? I don't know if I had a
I mean,
least
just the
favorite.
framing device is my least favorite.
Fair enough. I mean, I think what the framing device to me did well, it like, number 1, it made me intrigued about sort of the setup of religious groups in the world, but I think it also like, it starts with girl, like, having sex with somebody, so I'm like, "Okay, this is cool, okay." Um,
As he is wont to do.
yes. Full Test is terrible. It which character is this from the story we were talking one of the stories we were talking about?
I'm trying to remember. I know the name.
Names are
I think
difficult.
Foltest is the one whose daughter is. I could be wrong.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I just know I had a fun time reading this. Oh, hey, there's a picture of the author in the back of mine.
Oh, actually, there isn't in mine. I mean, I know what he looks like because I've seen interviews with him, but
I've got the UK edition, I guess. But
okay, yeah. Or is it confirmed that it's the king with the beastie daughter?
Okay, incest king.
Incest king.
Great, good to know. Yeah, that first entry is weird. Yeah, it's an interesting opening to the story. I'm kind of like, oh, all right, this is where we're going.
Not an inaccurate representation of what you will find in the Witcher series. There's lots and lots of sex in the Witcher series.
Yeah. I did think it was kind of funny in this the Last Wish where they're like, "Oh, are they okay?" Like I hear groaning and they're like, "Oh, nope, let's just leave them. They're okay." It's just there's a lot of that. It was funny. No, I had a good time with it. It was enjoyable. I'm excited to keep going. Jessica didn't have a least favorite. So, yeah, I think that might about cover The Last Wish. We are going to do On My Radar, where we'll share recent and upcoming book releases in sci-fi and fantasy and talk a little bit about what the next episode is going to be. Unless we've got a couple questions here, I might cover this. But and this year, you're getting our sci-fi fantasy recommendations for the month in the episode with Leanna and romance Rex in my episode with Izzy. So,
and Witcher related bonus content.
Oh, yes, good point. Patrons will get bonus content. So, Leanna, do you want to tell them what is our patron bonus content for this episode going to be?
For this episode, our patron bonus content will be talking about fairy tale retellings and the history of fairy tales.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So, if you're interested, you can join. You can get access to the bonus content for as little as $5 a month if you want to support us.
If you want to toss a coin,
Bethany, a coin,
you're totally fired.
Why did you were?
I didn't reference money. I didn't talk about money. If I had, I would have been like perfect opportunity to talk about coins.
But you're wearing the shirt.
That should have clued you in. You're the one looking at me. I'm not looking at me.
It's true. Toss a coin to your podcasters, y'all. I'll work on it. Okay.
Just sing it to yourself all day.
Yes, I'll just have it on repeat. Okay. Couple comments before we wrap this up. But Full Test is the incestuous king. He is terrible, but he's also only still trying to save and protect his daughter. Fair point. I never feel sorry for him, but I sympathize with his not wanting to give up. Yeah.
And his daughter is the innocent and all that.
Yeah. What do we think of The Wish? Oh, of him tying his life to Yennefer's? I want to see what the consequences are going to be. I don't know. I think it's going to be...
It's the eponymous story, presumably for a reason.
Yeah. All right. So, y'all, we're going to do On My Radar. And if you enjoy the podcast, we always appreciate if you take a moment to rate and review us, or if you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to comment below. And if you're interested in getting early access to episodes and exclusive bonus content with every episode, consider supporting us on Patreon and
chucking some change,
as Matt says, or toss some coins to your podcasters. Huge thanks to all of our supporting patrons. We really appreciate you, including our World Expander patrons, Trina and Stephanie. You all make what we do possible. So thank you for your support. And also note that the next episode will be February 13th. I'll be back with Izzy and we're going to go live talking about Real by Kennedy Ryan. So if you're a romance reader, it's going to be a good time. Okay, Leanna, you said you do have one book.
Yes, it is a miraculous day.
It's always a good day when you have one.
On my radar is The Magician's Daughter by H.G. Perry, which comes out February 28th. So the very end of February. H.G. Perry. I'm interested in this because she wrote The Shadow Histories, which is the Declaration of the Rights of Magicians and the Radical Act of Free Magic. So this is just an autobiography for me. But this book does sound enticing. It is set in 1912 and magic has been fading, but it's like a Irish magic folklore inspired thing. And I mean, it's called The Magician's Daughter. And there's lots and lots of shenanigans.
Love it. I've got some things coming out recently or soon. One I just finished that I think is fun if you like cozy fantasy and fairies is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I liked it. I think it's a little long, but it definitely has a lot of kind
I've had
of
so many people recommend
cozy.
that to me. I feel an odd amount of pressure to read that.
I don't I don't know if you would like it, to be honest, because it's one of those books that, like, it has more plot than some of the books you haven't liked that are, like, cozy fantasy, but it's more on that end of, like, slow-paced slice of life stuff. I don't know. It would be a toss-up. I enjoyed it, but I don't know, but you might. Like, if you're really into fairy mythology and, like, stuff,
I'm not into any
it's
mythology.
well, there you go. So I don't know. You could enjoy it, but it would be one of those ones where I'm like, yeah, I'd be on the fence about it. We'll see. Yes, I believe it is a standalone. And then The Keeper 6 by Kate Elliott is a novella that I really enjoyed. It's got portal fantasy and a middle-aged mom to an adult child who has been kidnapped, and she's going to go to the ends of the universe to save him. So if you like a badass older mom character and magic, it's really fun. Loved it. Her world building is excellent. Like, she puts like a novel's worth into a novella. Question is whether The Magician's Daughter one is a standalone.
I believe it is, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. Also, The Terraformers by Annalene Newitz is their new sci-fi book that I'm interested to read. It's like I don't really know exactly what the plot is. It's a little unclear, but I think it's talking about like capitalism and post-industrial societies with a sci-fi western vibe. And it's got a good cover. I'm intrigued. There's also a couple of YA books that I'm interested in. Wild Blood by Lauren Blackwood is a YA fantasy about like this exotic tour company in Jamaica that is like kidnapping black magical children and making them work for it. I don't know. Like, she's written some interesting things and does like creepy stuff. So we'll see what happens with that. And then The Severed Thread by Leslie Vedder is the sequel to The Bone Spindle, which I loved. And I didn't see a lot of people talking about it. It's sort of like a gender flip Sleeping Beauty meets Indiana Jones. And it's just a really good time. I had a lot of fun with it. And the sequel is coming out. And then the last book that I'll mention is Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. So if you like horror and you like Stephen Graham Jones, the second book is coming out in February, and I'm excited. I have it pre-ordered.
I too am waiting for Pharaoh Melgen, The Early Years. Thanks, Matt, for reminding us that we should be demanding a Pharaoh prequel from Joe Abercrombie.
Good luck.
But I viewers that I would also like to know what she did after the trilogy.
Yeah. That's fair. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our first Witcher episode. This has been Chapter 3 Podcast. We're your hosts, Bethany and Liene, and you can follow us, as always, on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Chapter 3 Podcast, and you can find us on our individual YouTube channels. Check the video description on YouTube and the show notes if you're listening on whatever podcast platform. The next episode will be available in 2 weeks. No, the next episode will be February 13th, which is about 2 weeks, but we've moved from every 2 weeks to bi-monthly. So, and bonus content for patrons will be available in the next few days. Thanks for listening.